Welcome to The Breakdown with James Lankford, where Oklahoma's Senator James Lankford discusses policy issues in Congress. Thank you for listening today. This is The Breakdown.
This is Senator James Lankford. I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, and we're doing a podcast, which we've talked about doing for a while, but have not actually stopped to be able to do it. So if you're listening to this, you're listening to the inaugural podcast. That would mean the rookie one. That would mean the one we're most likely to make some kind of random mistake just getting started on it. But glad you actually joined us into the dialogue. I'm in Washington, D.C. in the Hart Building actually today, just across the street from the Capitol. And I'm here with actually one of my team members. His name is Derek Osborne. He works on immigration policy in D.C. for quite a while, was in the Oklahoma office, then came to the D.C. office for 3 years. Since he works in immigration, then we say we deported him back to Oklahoma, where he'd rather be anyway, and is back in Oklahoma now working the Tulsa office. Derek, thanks for joining me here on the podcast today.
Senator, it's great to be here. Great to have the opportunity to engage in this conversation. It's important stuff we're working on.
It's exceptionally important, and it's one of the areas that you've worked on a lot with the staff here in the Senate, bipartisan, to be able to work with multiple areas of staff. I'm working with members, you're working with staff, and we're trying to be able to find a way that we can actually get to an agreement on immigration. You've worked a lot on these issues, and I know we're going to have some dialogue to be able to talk about some of the technical and complicated areas. But I want to be able to kind of set the context, not knowing when people are going to be able to listen to this podcast in the future. This is the 2-week time period that the nation's talking about family separation. President Trump put in a zero-tolerance policy on the border in May of actually this year, 2018. That policy basically said as individuals come across the border, we're going to hold them and we're going to work towards prosecution rather than just releasing them into the country. And what happened was obviously over 2,000 families were separated then, where adults went one way to be detained and children went towards HHS custody and care to be able to go into foster care, to be connected with a relative or some other way to be able to take care of them. And the nation as a whole all raised a corporate yell at that and said, whoa, we as a nation like to keep families together, not to be able to separate families. My statement to the administration was our default position should be keeping families together. The Trump administration's response immediately to this was, this is a result of bad case work in the past from the California court that's causing us to do this. And I think the whole country stopped and turned and looked for a moment at something they'd never heard of before called the Flores decision. And now that's something you and I, Derek, we've talked about several times on. In fact, we worked on a piece of legislation that came out in February of this year to try to resolve the Flores decision itself. So it's a 1997 law. Do you want to be able to talk through a little bit on that?
Sure. So it's important to note the administration is not actually enforcing any new laws when they say we're doing zero tolerance. They're enforcing the laws that are on the books today, that were on the books yesterday and during the previous administrations. The previous administrations just said we're not going to fully enforce every law.
They're using what they call prosecutorial discretion.
Exactly.
So you've got the option to be able to use it different ways, and so they took an option, and their option was release people into the country.
Right. Now, Flores says to the administration, you cannot hold a child in federal DHS custody for more than 20 days. At the 21-day mark, you either have to let them go, release them into the public, or transfer them to HHS custody. And HHS custody, as you know, is a barracks-like atmosphere. They're in a dormitory. They're given medical screening. They're given education opportunities every day, given healthy meals, plenty of times with their lawyers, with their families, anybody they need to be in contact with to eventually move out of federal custody. But Flores says DHS cannot hold them in a detention facility for more than 20 days.
Which becomes a problem. And as you talk with the administration, every administration before this one, it takes longer than 20 days to do the hearing. So if a family is picked up illegally crossing the border, and I want to just be able to clarify this, these are not individuals requesting asylum at a border crossing area. These are individuals that didn't come to a normal border crossing area and request asylum. These are individuals that crossed the border illegally. When they're picked up, and this has been a growing issue for a while, a decision has to be made. It takes 35 days at a minimum to do a hearing. Mm-hmm. Well, the Flores says you can only hold a child 20 days. So you've got a problem.
15-day discrepancy there.
So there's a huge gap there, and every administration has struggled with this since 1997 when it went into place by that court in California. So the challenge there is for past administrations, whether it be Clinton administration, Bush administration, Obama administration, was what do we do if you can only hold a child 20 days, but a hearing takes 35 days? So what previous administrations have done is said, okay, we're going to release the family into the interior of the country. Y'all stay together as a family and have what's called a notice to appear at court at a future date. So they would just give you a piece of paper and say, keep this with you so that people will know that we visited with you, but you've got to appear at a court and have a hearing on it.
And how far out is that?
Well, that's been the problem, is that historically that's been 6 months to a year to 2 years, but it's been rapidly growing as the number of people are coming at our southern border. Now, the longest period of time that it may take to get a notice to appear, your first hearing after you illegally cross the border, is 4 years. It's August of 2022. Do
you have any idea what you're doing in 4 years and 2 months?
No, I actually do not have any idea what I'm going to be doing right now, 4 years, 4 years and 2 months from now. But that's the crazy thing about this, and why the Trump administration is pushing back, saying we have to release people into the country, and they're here for 4 years before they get their first hearing. Their attempt is, how do we actually get a hearing sooner in the process so that we actually know? And this is a growing issue that the Obama administration was working on as well. If you go back to 2013, there were 15,000 families that were coming across, those family individuals coming across the border illegally that were picked up by the Obama administration in 2013. But by 2016, the last year of the Obama administration, there were 77,000 that were coming. Now this year, 2018, the estimated number based on the percentages and where we're going this year is about 89,000. So this is a growing issue that every administration is trying to address at some point and to be able to figure out, and it is an area that we need to resolve. Now, back in a piece of legislation that you and I worked on in February here in the Senate, there was a bipartisan piece of legislation to try to deal with this. It was in there. We had a solution to the Flores issue to try to resolve this. But it was also a larger piece of legislation as well. We were trying to deal with border security. How do you resolve border security, which used to not be a divisive issue, but now
not at all.
For some strange it is.
Senator Schumer voted for it. Senator Obama, Senator Clinton, Senator Biden, staunch conservatives voted to secure the border.
So in 2016, when the Secure Fences Act passed, that was the first time to do, and what we have now, 650 miles of fencing on our southern border, was because all those individuals you just listed voted for it, as well as a lot of other Republicans and a lot of other Democrats. This was not a partisan issue to secure the border in the past, as recently as 2006. Now it's become this incredibly divisive issue. I don't think it should be a divisive issue. I think every country should be able to secure their own borders. Now, we as the United States are the most open immigration country in the world. And a lot of people don't realize that because, quite frankly, we as Americans beat up ourselves on how we handle immigration policy. We have over 1 million people a year that become citizens of the United States legally going through the process, 1.1 million a year. I just did a naturalization ceremony just a couple of weeks ago in Oklahoma City and had the opportunity to be able to welcome a whole group of new Americans and to say, you're exactly like I am at this point. You're an American citizen, have every single right. You've gone through this process. Welcome. You're a part of us and of our larger national family.
And we tell our many listeners that if they've never gone to that ceremony and heard the first time that all those new citizens say the Pledge of Allegiance, it's incredibly moving.
Bring Kleenex with you. It really is. They're waving little American flags. Their families that are there are all cheering. Incredibly moving moment for them. But there's 1.1 million a year that go through that process legally. Every single day on our southern border, 500,000 people a day legally cross our southern border that go through ports of entries, go through that process, 500,000 every single day. So I hear people say, we're closed, there's no other way to be able to get to us, they have to be able to do this illegally. That's not true. Now, is the process complicated at times, need to be simplified? I absolutely agree. But we should be able to identify how we can actually secure our borders, whether it be walls, fences, whether it be technology, whether it's additional agents that are there to be able to help people, whether it's compassion because they're in the desert on a long journey and trying to interdict them because we do have a lot of people that perish in our deserts trying to be able to cross because they just run out of food and water there. There are things that we should do just based on our compassion, but also based on our law. We also believe in this whole issue about DACA as well, to say we've got to resolve the DACA issue, and we did that back in February. So not only resolving Flores, resolving the issue about DACA, resolving the issue about border security. Those are important things to be able to do, but there's also bigger issues. Asylum. Now, that's a tough one.
Now, the February bill did not touch asylum.
Right.
Is there something that we need to do in the future dealing with asylum?
I would tell you the bill that we did in February, we tried to keep as small as we could and actually deal with some of the biggest issues. But this is an unresolved issue that we have to resolve, and I think is greatly misunderstood. There's really two ways of obtaining asylum in the United States. There's what's called affirmative asylum. That's you actually go to a port of entry, you haven't broken any law, you come to an agent and you say, I'm requesting asylum coming from this country, and there's certain standards you have to do. One of those that's the very beginning that they'll start a conversation about is where you'll say, I have a credible fear for my life back home. And so they're coming. Now, technically, asylum, according to international law, is something you should request in the next closest country. So wherever you go next, if they have asylum privileges, you should be able to do that. So if someone's coming from El Salvador, for instance, it'd be much closer for them to go to Costa Rica, a very peaceful country. They have asylum laws, to be able to go there and request asylum rather than travel the 1,000 miles across Honduras, Guatemala, through Mexico to then get to southern United States and to be able to request asylum. That is, most often we find people that cross all the way across from all those countries that are coming, not people that are seeking asylum necessarily, they're seeking economic opportunities. And I understand that completely.
Or they have family here.
Or they have family here, that's right. They're trying to be able to reconnect with family, but that's not asylum. But often they'll get a first clearance to say, okay, we're coming for credible fear. They'll come in, they'll allow them to be able to come in, they'll process them together, they're released into the country until they can get an asylum hearing. And again, that is months to years before they get that asylum hearing, go through it. But what's interesting is a lot of people that request asylum at the border then never actually file an asylum request. They just disappear into the country. There's another large percentage of those that file for asylum that never end up actually getting asylum. And this has been true for a long time. If you go back to, let's say, 2016, the last year of the Obama administration, only 13% of the people that even bothered to file for asylum actually received asylum because they didn't qualify for it.
What happens to the other percentage?
The other percentage are asked what's called a notice of removal for them. That they've gone through all the appeals, they brought all their evidence in, they've said, actually, you're not coming for asylum, you're coming because you have family members here, economic opportunity, and so they're asked to have a removal. The hard part with that is only about 2% of the people that actually have a notice of removal actually leave the country. This is the grand challenge. Which means somewhere around 98% of the people that come into the country either seeking asylum but don't qualify for it, or cross the border illegally, about 98% of those folks never return, even after they've gone through all their court proceedings. We have 1 million people inside the country right now that currently have a notice of removal responsibility. They've gone through all of their court appeals and have done it the right way, but they've been asked to leave the country and actually do it the right way to come through our legal system, but they're still in the country and we don't know where they are.
All right, we just have another minute or two. Try to forecast for us what happens next. What's going to happen later this fall? Is there going to be something that jolts Congress into action, or do we just continue moving along slowly?
Derek, as you and I have talked about several times, the hardest part about immigration is there's no deadline for it. The issues rise and fall based on what's happening in the news, and the whole country and Congress gets distracted with the next thing. It's been decades since we've really dealt with anything serious on immigration policy. Since the Secure Fences Act in 2006 was the last major touch on anything, and that was really just border security, but it didn't deal with a lot of other issues there. What I mentioned before about asylum, we've got to be able to resolve what only is affirmative asylum coming to the border, but also what is defensive asylum, people that illegally cross the border. Then when they get caught, they claim, I want to request asylum to try to prevent themselves from being deported at that point. There's a whole series of issues we've got to resolve. So my focus right now, and I know yours is as well, is meeting with staff, meeting with members of the Senate, meeting with members of the House, and saying, what can we do to bring people together to try to get to a solution that we can agree on? We're not going to agree on everything, but what's the common ground that we can all agree on and try to get this resolved in a bipartisan way? The second thing that I think we can do, we've actually already started as well, and that's the issue of what can be done in Central America. Most of the individuals that are coming to the United States are not coming from Mexico anymore. They're coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador.
Northern Triangle countries.
Yeah, what's called the Northern Triangle in Central America. So that's a group of nations where there's been a lot of economic problems. Now, a lot of folks have said it's a horrible place, it's terrible, there's lots of violence. There are some violent areas of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, but not most of it. Most of the country is still a very peaceful country. So the challenge is for those individuals that are coming often to be able to connect with families or for economic opportunities, could it be better if we as Americans help them in their governments deal with government corruption, deal with economic opportunities that can grow in their own country? I've personally visited with the president of of Guatemala and of Honduras, and they say we're embarrassed that our country members leave the country. We want them to have the great economic opportunities here. We want to keep our own families together here in Central America, in our country. Those countries are beautiful countries to be able to be in, but they just need to be able to work through their own issues. We should help with them. So 3 years ago, we started something called the Alliance for Prosperity to be able to help the countries in Central America in their own legal system, to be able to have their economic opportunities, to be able to help their governance, to be able to do what we can to be able to help protect that environment. And I think it's extremely important. I've visited the region multiple times and think it's exceptionally important to be able to help that area, because it helps us as a nation with immigration issues, but it also helps somebody in the Western Hemisphere that's a neighbor of ours.
It's a very Christian and American attitude, and it's a bipartisan one as well. Well, sir, I have enjoyed the opportunity to have this conversation. Hopefully we will have a few more of these as time goes by. I know you have some things you want to close with, but we want to remind everybody, don't forget to go to our website, lankford.senate.gov. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Stay up with all the news going on here in D.C. and also around the state.
Yeah, social media platforms are always just Senator Lankford Trot straightforward. And I would encourage you, when you go on our social media platforms, be civil.
Yes.
We're trying to model civility in what we're doing, and we would encourage other people to be able to engage. Everybody can have your own opinion. You don't have to have the same opinion that I have, but we can win the arguments and be able to talk about it in a way that's respectful of every person. We try to do that in the immigration issues as well. We understand the compassion for people and have a deep affection for people as individuals, as an individual human being and as a family. And I think we can show that kind of respect to other people. But we also need to be a nation of laws, and we're trying to be able to figure out that balance, to be able to figure out what does that mean. So let's share ideas together on how we can fix our immigration system. I'm going to continue to push this. Again, with the hard part of there's no deadline, so it seems to always hang out there, pushing Congress to say we've reached a point that this has become horrible for us as a nation and an embarrassment worldwide. We have to be able to resolve this issue for the benefit of not only our nation and our own future, but for compassion for the people that are crossing our border, even that are crossing illegally. Be able to figure out how we can enforce the law and how we can do that in a compassionate way. So I look forward to people just sharing their ideas and having the ongoing dialogue here. So thanks for enjoying, and I hope you did, the very first ever podcast that we put out from our office, and hopefully you'll get a chance to participate with us in the future.